All right, so we are live. Cool. Chris, how you doing?
Quite well. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. Got my coffee here. What about you? You doing coffee this morning?
Oh no, of course not. Coffee's a sin, right?
Oh man, I stopped drinking coffee for a little bit just to see if I could, and I could, but then I kept hearing about all the health benefits, so I went back to it. But I just drink it black. Um, but yeah, what are you drinking this morning?
I just start with water, try to hydrate. I usually will either do water or lately I've been drinking those Arizona tea watermelon juice ones.
Oh, okay.
I it's just for the flavor though. I don't There's no health benefits to it. It's just a bunch of sugar.
Gotcha. I've been dabbling in electrolytes lately. I've been kind of looking into it and trying to get high quality, like potassium and magnesium powder. And so when I start with my water, I put a little bit of those minerals in there.
Mixing your
But yeah.
own version of Gatorade.
Yeah. Gatorade minus the sugar for yeah. But yeah, okay. So we talked a couple weeks ago, and we talked about veganism. It was an interesting talk because you were already on the stance of finding it immoral to harm and kill animals just to eat them. But because of the norms, how they are as of now, you consume them about the same amount as your average person.
Yeah, about the same or maybe a little bit less. Just
Okay.
I don't eat meat for every meal, and there's some days that it's just inconvenient to make a meat dish, so I just don't.
Gotcha. Okay. And then part of our talk was I made some comment about picking a random day of the week to not eat to like see if you could go vegan for a whole day. And I was supposed to bug you about it, but I forgot to remind you. Did you end up taking a Wednesday and going full vegan for a day?
I did two Wednesdays,
Oh,
this
really?
last
Okay.
one and then the week prior.
Oh, cool. Okay, so what was your thoughts?
I mean, keeping it within the mind of doing said task. Like I had to make a note in my phone. I added a little alarm and like there's a
Oh,
lot of
awesome.
steps to remind me to like do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I live in a larger city. There's a lot of vegan options. Like I literally could go out for every meal and still have something vegan and something different anywhere I go. So like I didn't
Gotcha.
even have to make anything. It was just readily available in my area. I think it would have been a different experience if I would have been living more rurally or somewhere that has less dine out options.
Yeah.
But for me, it was pretty easy. And
Okay.
like some of the food wasn't great, was not impressed in some cases, but some of them I was like, I'd eat it again.
Okay. Did you go to like a restaurant that you were used to that you have a favorite thing that wasn't vegan and you had to like look through the menu to find a vegan option?
I did go to somewhere that I do enjoy specific food, but and it was just a Lebanese place that I was like, man, I really want the lamb.
Oh, gotcha.
Like I had to
Um,
make that mental reminder of just like I'm trying to do something different. But luckily, they also have a lot of vegan and vegetarian options that were just plentiful to begin with. So I was like picking something vegan. It was still delicious, and it was just food I enjoy. So it wasn't that much of a sacrifice.
gotcha. Cool. Well, I'm glad you tried it out. Okay, and then so I also we talked about the idea of both of us watching Dominion and then talking about it. I had never seen it, even though I have seen things like it. And you watched it. You watched the whole thing.
Oh yeah.
Cool. And you took notes. So I kind of failed. I didn't get around to watching it until we were talking yesterday about our talk today, and then I watched 23 minutes, and my phone died, and I was away from my house. And anyways, I basically made it through what I'm guessing is almost all of the pig story. Um,
Yeah, so it's like the parallels that I drew was after our first talk, I rewatched Food Inc.
okay,
from the early 2000s.
yeah, that was a good one.
And I was like, man, I remember watching this way back when, but I hadn't watched it recently. watched it, and then I was like, oh yeah, and then was like, oh, I gotta watch this newer one, and it definitely felt like a successor to Food Inc. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was a lot of more modern information, updated stats, as well as like adding additional steps. Like Food Inc. really focused around food, of course, and it mostly just focused on like the better known animals, and it was an American story versus an Australian focused story with more than just animals that we eat, but like it also goes into like foxes and like um, puppy farms and stuff like that. Like there's they in Dominion they explored more than just like the things that end up on our plates, but also on our bodies as well as the things that we have milling around our house, depending on us for food.
Yeah, yeah. I remember one of the most horrifying parts of a movie called Earthlings, which I think this is almost like a remake of. Like Earthlings was a documentary that covered all the things this seems to cover, but it was made maybe 10 years before, and Joaquin Phoenix did the narration and producing of that one as well. And the main difference seems to be that the cameras that they got when they have hidden cameras in the factories are high quality on this one, where it was
Hmm.
really hard to watch with the other one. But the thing that maybe hit me the most on Earthlings was a thing with like a fur farm, and they were showing that to get the perfect fur, they didn't want blood to get on it, so they had to like strip the fur off them. Maybe it was minks while they were alive.
Hmm.
And yeah, anyways, it was just devastating to see what some people
I was gonna
do.
say towards the end of this one, they also go into mink farming and
Hmm.
like along with the various other animals we use for fur.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, well, before we watch a little bit of this, because I think it would be cool to like watch a couple minutes and discuss like how we think maybe laws should change in the country or something. Um, Go ahead and just tell me if there like, do you feel different now that you've watched it? Has it affected you in any like powerful way, or did you kind of already feel about the same and it's just a tough world we live in?
For me personally, it was like in the moments of like visually watching it, there was like it's not something that I have in my daily rotation of like visual media. So there
Mm-hmm.
was a little bit of the shock value was still there, even though it's not something new to me or things I haven't seen before. But like kind of like refreshing it in the sense of like seeing it now versus seeing it last year and or seeing it personally as like a kid. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like there was that like in the moment had like an emotional response for sure. But it
Mm-hmm.
definitely faded after I'd say probably around the chicken part was where I just
Mm.
it was not as shocking anymore and it just kind of like set me back into the more like it was uncomfortable to watch, sure, but it wasn't anything specifically new to my personal experiences.
Gotcha.
And then like I it hasn't changed my opinion on anything
Mm-hmm.
per se, just because it's like the only thing that really changed was now I have more updated stats on some of this animal information and a little bit more insight on some of the things that happened in Australia versus America. Like I have more information, but it didn't really change where I stand.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Um, well, here, let me since I labeled this as a reaction to this, I imagined we could watch a little bit and then talk about some details. Well, I do want to ask you a couple questions before I hit play on this. Can you remind me? So you had told me last time that you you thought it was immoral. You do it because that's what everybody else does, but you kind of wish that it was illegal so you could just be forced not to because you don't want to do it. Did did I hear that correctly? And like, would you actually want it to be illegal, or like that you think based on based on our knowledge of not needing animals to survive, and um, based on the moral side of it, that your personal preference, if you were putting it to a vote, would be that it's illegal, or do you just kind of wish it was illegal to help push you, but you don't necessarily think other humans should be forced into not committing the immoral acts?
For me specifically, I am a creature of convenience. Like if it's convenient and easier, I usually go that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And with like the legality of things usually changes how convenient something becomes. And
Mm-hmm.
specifically, I wouldn't make like farming or consuming meat be illegal. I would specifically change it so that you couldn't sell meat. So if you wanted to
Oh,
consume meat, you would have to personally butcher it and
interesting.
raise that
Okay.
animal. I feel like if someone had a direct connection to what they're consuming, that would change a lot of like for me, I don't want to do that. That's a lot of extra work. But for some people, they don't want to do it because that means they'll directly have blood on their hands. Like they're no longer inhumanizing or de-animalizing their what they're consuming. And I feel like
Gotcha.
that would change a lot of people just because I think there's a lot of people out there that are literally like if there was a vegan fast food option, they'd probably pick it.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think you're right, especially with the idea of somebody having to do it themselves or having to
Mhm.
have like a friend give it to them. But yeah, if you take away the selling option,
And
yeah,
it's so
that's
much of
interesting.
this is just like it's factory farms, like it's driven by capitalism. Like
Mm-hmm.
so much of it is like, hey, if your farm doesn't do it these ways, you're not going to make any money and your farm's going to go under. And someone else is just going to buy that land and just do that anyways. So we're taking away
Yeah.
that capital incentive to do these things. I you see it like it's like cigarettes. Like it's not in vogue. There's lots of laws now against smoking in different places. We've seen a historical dip in the consumption of cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's just literally laws against doing it in all the places that make it convenient to smoke normally. And
Yeah.
like I think that if we just see a mirror in like in that's why I think it's just literally one law that makes it so we can't sell meat like that. Like I think that would be a really quick and easy way to decrease the amount consumed. And
Mm-hmm.
then like it's still not the perfect solution, but I think that'd be the best segue to get away from it in the most meaningful impact towards the mass consumption.
Yeah. So do you think if that were to happen and therefore you essentially just went vegan because the food wasn't at the stores, do you think that would be enough to make you just be full vegan, or would you still accept if a friend that was like a hunter or something like gave you meat to put in your freezer, jerky or something, that you would consume it?
I think that if it was just given to me, more often than not, if it's something that tastes good and is given to me, I'll probably eat it. I think it'd be the same if they gave me a bundle of snap peas. Like
Gotcha. Okay.
I don't have any qualms against the consumption still. Like it's something that like the factory farm stuff sound it's every single part of that is in my opinion
Hmm.
evil. But like
Yeah.
a hunter hunting a deer in the woods, like I don't really have any qualms with that. Like they're more often than not just shooting it once, putting it down, consuming it. Well, that's where it's like I don't care for trophy hunters, but
Hmm.
like I have some like Native American family that bow hunts deer. Like
Mm.
they consume every part, they use everything off the animal. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't feel too bad about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely seems to be a higher level of respect there, and yeah, it's definitely different. Um,
But
would you?
I think the disconnect there too is where it's like I don't quite see the um the deer on the same levels I see a person.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
But at that same sort of thing, like I could be convinced the other
Hmm.
way, but I do struggle with wanting to be imposing that sort of law where it's the something that I don't quite resonate with yet, where it's
Yeah,
like no
yeah.
animals ever get killed sort of thing.
Gotcha. Do you personally boycott like not necessarily like in a protesty way, but just yourself boycott places that you think do immoral acts? Like a lot of people don't go to say Chick-fil-A because I guess maybe the owners donate money to like anti-gay places or something like that. Do you kind of ignore all that kind of stuff, or if it's a simple one company you can avoid thing, do you avoid it?
I think that depends on the situation. Like, I mean, I personally don't eat at Chick-fil-A because I am on that side of like supporting the gay agenda.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. The gay agenda.
I think of it in the sense of I will there's so many things that were like up on the chopping block within that realm of like don't support these companies because they're like anti-gay or anti-trans.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so many of those companies I already weren't participating in, so it was pretty easy. Chick
Yeah,
Fil A is just one of those things where I'm like, I'm never really around one to begin with, so it's such an easy win
yeah.
in
Oh, gotcha.
in quotations culture war aspect.
Yeah,
So it's like that one was never really that big of a thing, but I like trying to think of a company that I actually liked consuming from. It's definitely tough because I personally am deeply embedded within the LGBTQ community
mm-hmm.
and surround myself with friends and family that are on that side, as well as being an anti-religious person,
Mm-hmm.
like specifically anti-organized religion, like personal religious belief and like doing things just for yourself. I no problem with that, but when it starts to affect the laws that are put into place and additional people, it becomes, in my opinion, a little sillier.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
like
No,
it
definitely.
feels like you're imposing your god on other people, which is
Yeah,
just it's a personal thing too, in that sense where I'm not gonna wear a shirt that tells you that you're wrong. But I do find myself. I will at least say I align in those senses. It's just I'm struggling to find a company that I personally give dollars to that doesn't align itself with my opinions and beliefs.
gotcha, gotcha.
So it's I don't know. I might have to reevaluate the companies I do purchase from though, just because
Hmm.
like struggling to think of even one case where I was like on the fence in that sense is
Yeah,
definitely a little worrisome because I'm like, there's got to be at least one. Like, there's all these companies are pretty rotten. Like, there's got to be at least one that doesn't support the queer kids.
yeah, yeah. It's tough because it's hard to find time to do all the things that we need to do in the world, and so especially something like researching to a thorough degree a company and like their background and what's actually happening is pretty tough. I don't know if there's any places I specifically boycott. But I'm not against the idea if I had reason for it. But yeah, let's watch like a minute here, and then I want to ask you a question or two based on what we watch. Let's see.
In the 1960s, there were around 50,000 pig farms in Australia. Today, there are less than 1,400, and yet the total number of pigs bred and slaughtered for food has increased. As of 2015, 49 farms housed 60% of the country's total pig population. Most pigs bred for food begin life in a farrowing crate, a small pen with a central cage, designed to allow the piglets to feed from their mother, the sow, while preventing her from moving around. The frequency of stillborn or mummified piglets generally increases with each litter as the sows' bodies become less capable of handling the large litter sizes encouraged by the industry. 10 to 18% of piglets who are born alive won't make it until weaning age, succumbing to disease, starvation, or dehydration, or being accidentally crushed by their trapped mothers. Included in the death toll are the runts of the litter, who are considered economically unviable and killed by staff.
All right, I'm going to pause there for a sec. Okay, so one thing that's kind of interesting is I know most of the vegans I talk to actually, the ones that are like willing to talk and like with their voices and whatnot, kind of like we're doing now, are against any form of animal welfare. Like that their thought process is that as a vegan activist, they should push veganism and try to turn people vegan. And outside of that, they should never do anything where any time is wasted on trying to get laws changed or anything like that for animal welfare. And it shocks me because I think that although it's nice to also push for veganism, that trying to get laws changed for animal welfare seems to be such a bigger priority in my mind. So I think I want to go through watching Dominion with vegans and try to have them watch this and see what's happening and tell me honestly again that they don't want to at least put a sliver of their time into fighting for animal welfare. Uh,
I
but
think that that's such an important step too, just because
mhm.
like we can't just expect everyone to give up their meat right away.
Yeah.
Like, I
Um,
mean, the idea, the top goal, I assume, of vegan activism is every human is now vegan.
yeah.
But it's like there's a lot of steps between there and like or here and there, if that's the actual goal.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's clear that everything throughout history that has gone from being one way to being a better way involves some kind of steps like that. I don't know if certain things need more or less steps, but yeah, so the question I have for you, so I know you said that you wished it was outlawed to sell meat, so people would have to do their own butchering, and that would remove all of what we're seeing here. And what I would want might even be a different, slightly further step, but probably actually something like that. I don't want to outlaw the eating of meat, but it would probably be something like what you're saying. But in the meantime, while we do have farms like this, I'm always curious to hear what other people think about what laws should exist because I'm not quite in favor yet of outlawing eating meat, but also I'm very libertarian, so I'm of the idea that people should have freedoms, but I don't think their freedoms should extend to torturous acts.
Mhm.
So anyways, I kind of want to break down with you just off what we just saw. If you were going to put it into law or try to get laws passed, what laws would you pass based on what we just watched a minute of?
I think that I think going hard into the removal of something would be difficult just because it's like politically speaking, I would like people to have more rights than less.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I don't want people to have like rights to, torture and stuff like that. That's like the betterment of us would probably be for the betterment of us sort of situation. Like I don't think
Yeah.
torture is helping us, and it's clear that heavy consumption of meat is not helping us. It's there's so many things that aren't helping us by doing any of this process. Like
Hmm.
the not only from the whole all the studies that show additional greenhouse gases from all these massive farms, the
Hmm.
the effects that this level of meat consumption is on the human bodies, and there's just so many things that aren't helping us. And I'm also not surprised on the dip in farms when it was saying there was like 50,000 farms, and now there's
Hmm.
only like a couple thousand. Like it's just they're streamlining the process to make as much money as possible for as little money as possible.
Yeah.
Like they're doing what makes capitalism function. They're streamlining. They are. It doesn't matter the ethics of it. It matters the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
And so
think,
I think that's where it's like the law to remove the ability to sell meat would help, just because now we're removing the revenue stream that would be from this.
for sure.
And
Oh,
I
definitely.
don't, I don't it's like the idea that it would then kill a whole industry, that's whatever, because they're just going to find another industry to abuse. Like the idea
Yeah.
that a billionaire is going to be like, oh no, my revenues, like every single company that made billions of dollars off of cigarettes bought money into vaping, put tons of money
Hmm.
into vaping.
Yeah.
And like the same groups are putting money into marijuana. Like they're just going
Hmm.
to shift. They're going to keep putting their money wherever they can see another place to abuse and take to the most extreme version of what it used to be.
Yeah, for sure.
So I
I'm
think
gonna.
to just decrease this amount of suffering, I'd say top of the line is just making it so it's not viable revenue wise.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. No, I totally agree. I'm going to read a couple comments from the live stream chat real quick, and then I have another question for you. But so Christian's asking me, what do you think of the idea that pushing the welfare reform only further um, enmeshes animals into the paradigm of it's okay to do this as long as it's done better? And then he says, animal welfarism has existed for literally centuries, yet we exploit more animals in worse ways than ever. So, what I want to say to Christian about that is that it's complicated because if you look at the idea of animal welfarism existing for a certain amount of time, like you can look at slavery existing for all of human history and you can look at different points of when it's better or worse, but the fact that something's been around for a while, so if a few centuries ago there were people caring about animals, and then all of a sudden when companies can do what Chris here is talking about, which is be able to streamline it and have these factories and figure out how to fit the smallest amount of animals into one space, how to grow them the quickest, and all this. When we figured out how to do that, and by we I mean just people, people took advantage of that to make that money, but it didn't get worse because welfarism was a bad idea. It got worse because it didn't get outlawed, and whichever things were allowed were allowed. And so there is a slight concern of making things better will make people care less about it. But if there's a wrong issue, then there's a wrong issue. And so even when you make things better, people will. I think when you make things better and you make it known and talked about, people will will look at it more and care about it more. I think I had heard somebody talk about like how so many millions of slaves died on the slave boats coming from Africa to the U.S. and or just to the Americas in general. And if there was a law having better conditions to where they wouldn't have died, that probably wouldn't have prevented people from wanting to end slavery quicker. And if you had various different things in place where like slave owners weren't legally allowed to kill their slaves and they weren't legally allowed to have them in like weren't allowed to starve them or something like that, then I think when it comes time for people wanting to abolish slavery, it wouldn't have been something like, oh, well, we make sure they're fed and don't die, so we're not going to end slavery. We can still see the issue if there's an issue. So if you take away certain abilities to treat these pigs horribly, but people can still kill them and eat them, if there's an issue still there, I think it's able to be fought for.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that it's even with the like just decreasing the amount of something isn't removing it completely. So I think
Mhm.
that even if we made it so that it was harder to do these things or less incentivized, there would still be a fight to be had.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and people can keep fighting for it. Like, so the vegans that are fighting for total liberation and veganism right now, they could still fight for it even if all these welfare ideas went into place. And I don't know exactly how much time to put into each different thing, but it makes sense to me when I watch something like what we just watched, and then obviously what's going to come up next. I just think, oh man, I almost think half my time that I'm able to put into veganism should be into looking into laws changing. And I heard a list yesterday of the basically animal ag. There's a list of what they thought were the most concerning things that were kind of destroying their companies. And their number one thing was lobbyists. The thing that they need to be careful about and watch out for is lobbyists affecting meat sales. And then there's a handful of things, but most of the things was like legislation changes. They want to make sure that, because in California, they changed something to like the size of pig crates. And if the size changed, then it costs them more. They have to sell it for more. And so anyways,
People will buy it less.
Right, exactly. And so, not that list necessarily matters, but almost everything on that list pointed to things like these kind of welfare changes. But okay, so if we couldn't convince them to do what me and you want, which is making it illegal to sell them, what would you say if so pig farms still exist, but we were going to put laws into it, so these runts that would not grow big enough to feed, like to turn into meat, and they're bashing them against the ground. Now, would you think there should be a law in place where maybe they have to set them aside to get picked up for like a sanctuary, or should they have to like do a lethal injection that would make them suffer less? What are your thoughts on like a welfare approach, but to not remove the farm itself?
I feel that the farm in itself is just the opposite of welfare. So like just that it exists makes it hard to be like trying to come up with a humane way for just the like handful that they're removing in that way. I would want there to be more about like maybe a rule where it's like either euthanasia or a something that both hits them monetarily as well as creates a better life for those animals, which is not a whole lot for animals being raised that way. I think that it would have to be on that same idea of making the free range thing. Then again, there's no, like, so many of these tags that they have to put on food for certain things, there's not as much legality behind it for like, oh, this is organic and this is free range. Like, that stuff's not checked up at the same level as making sure there's no E. coli.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like there would have to be rule changes for like things being verified to be free range and stuff like that to create something a little bit more in the sense of welfare wise, which could also be one of those like baby steps towards the ultimate goal. But I think for like a more drastic one that would at least cause a somewhat smaller amount of suffering, maybe moving towards a sanctuary project for animals that are like in quotations deemed not fit for being put into the meat grinder. So I'm not quite sure what we would do with said sanctuaries. Like,
yeah, it would depend on if it's a government-ran sanctuary or if there just happens to be sanctuaries in the area that are willing to pick the animals up. It might have to be like a Humane Society type thing where the Humane Society picks up stray dogs, and if they don't get adopted, they put them down, where maybe the government would have the Humane Society pick them up, the runts up, but then a sanctuary would have to adopt them if they don't want them to be euthanized.
Yeah, it's tough because I don't want like taxpayers' dollars to have to pay for a company's misdeeds.
True. Yeah, no, it's a good point. But that might be better than...
It is better than just slamming their heads on the concrete.
Right? Because you have to give them some kind of an option. But in the comments, Christian says, this guy is non-vegan, ? Or pre-vegan, ? I think... you being a good moral person is making you come across as at least somewhat like a vegan, even though you're not.
I mean, it's not that I'm not out there trying to advocate for more factory farms, or I think if I was to have a label, it would definitely be on the side of like I want less suffering, but I'm also like anti-religious, anti-capitalism sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't have a viable like replacement for anything, so I'm somewhat lazy, just straight up somewhat lazy. So
Yeah.
I just kind of sit on the sideline. I'm a commentary with some ideas that align with veganism.
Yeah. Well, so I'm putting together a definition. I might have told you this, but I'm putting together a definition for veganism, and you would actually fit on my definition. Now, you would be a vegan that needs a good talking to and needs to be a little less lazy. But
Facts.
I'll share that definition with you later when I get it all finalized. It's actually pretty close. Christian said our tax dollars are already funding this, so that's a good point. If the tax dollar amount doesn't change and our tax dollars are becoming subsidies for these guys, I don't
Mhm.
think that necessarily needs to mean that tax dollars should go towards saving these runts or anything. But I think that is a good focus. I don't know how we can get a conversation going with our entire country to get people to get politicians to want to get to the level of not having subsidies go to these factory farms. But
You become independently wealthy and then lobby for it.
yeah,
It's
right.
I
I
think
guess
it's
yeah,
just yeah, it's whoever puts dollars in their pockets. Like
yeah,
we would have to come up with a way to make veganism either incredibly attractive to lobbyists and venture capitalists, or
yeah,
become independently wealthy and create like a social change. Like, I mean, smoking cigarettes isn't cool anymore, and we don't really see it in films anymore. And like, there were so many things that
mhm,
went along with the laws. Like, I think that
yeah,
I'm not personally a fan of Elon Musk,
hmm,
but he definitely created the cool factor of owning a Tesla and made a car that was like people wanted because it was fast and sleek and like
mm,
the hip thing. It wasn't the
hmm,
only reason, but there was factors in that sense where it's like, and then we saw a boost in electric cars across the board for a bunch of different companies, like, and which I'm not big on the whole like strip mining and all the stuff that goes along with lithium ion batteries, but more money towards making a more sustainable battery, more money towards like more focused on green technology, which has its own level of facades and farces included, but it at least feels like it steps in the right way while still making it like socially in vogue.
gotcha.
And I
Um,
feel like veganism is, it's at least in some circles, are making that sort of change as well. Like,
yeah,
I mean, there's lots of who was it? Steve-O from Jackass,
hmm,
big vegan, has reach and sway with certain groups of people, and I feel like those changes help in that sense.
hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's what it's going to be. Most things just happen in almost like a snowball effect. If once somebody recognizes some kind of change that probably should happen, the most recent extreme one would be going from people either not caring or being anti-gay to being pro-gay marriage. And before that was like interracial marriage. Before that was women having the right to be humans. Uh, but yeah, I think as a certain number of people like wake up to an idea, then it does a snowball effect.
Hmm.
Christian here in the comments was asking about my definition, so I'll just read it really quick because it's kind of short and I keep refining it. But basically, the definition I think should be used for veganism is veganism is a philosophy that seeks to extend moral consideration to all non human animals based on sentience. Um, so So what the reason for like the based on sentience would be that the reason we care about the suffering and death of humans and non-human animals is because they can feel pain, they can try to survive. A lot of people are okay with eating bivalves like clams and oysters and stuff like that because there is scientific consensus that those aren't sentient. They don't have a brain. They don't have a central nervous system. They can't feel anything. So you have to have your moral reason for this. And so, anyways, so the idea of like someone like you that, like, so when I ate meat and I decided to be vegan, I wanted to be vegan for the same reason that of everything you're describing, that like you think it's immoral, this shouldn't happen. And I went vegan for like a year and then I stopped because I just like, I guess I just missed meat and I loved it. I was addicted to it. And kind of how I view the idea of like, so I'm an atheist, but when I look at like religion, somebody subscribes to a religion, they are a Christian. But if they fail at the things in the religion, like if they have sex before marriage or whatever what they do, they're not all of a sudden not a Christian and then soon they'll be a Christian again. They might just be a bad Christian or a Christian that their fellow Christians need to talk to. But there's not like you must do this if you subscribe to a philosophy. And so with veganism, I feel like I fell off the wagon and then I got back on and now I've been vegan for 8 years. And with you, part of it might be addiction, part of it might be laziness, convenience, whatever. But like you are one of the people that views animals as deserving moral consideration. And so you're not going to go and kick a puppy in the face for no reason. And you might also extend it to further actions. Where some people just don't care. And so I think veganism should apply to the people hoping for change, wanting a change, realizing that these animals are suffering and knowing that that isn't nothing.
I agree with that. I mean, I think that anybody that's not willing to kick a puppy in the face, I think that just like showing them, giving them those personal experiences with where their food comes from can change a lot of minds. And like, just like I personally, when I was a kid, I have cousins that raised like dairy cows and stuff and had a factory farm. And so
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't at the mass scale that some of these that are depicted in the video, but it was pretty good sized. And like being out there and being first like eyewitness to some of this stuff definitely changed my opinions, but it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
quite enough to make me be a vegan.
Gotcha.
And I
Gotcha.
think that there was that like I think there's that additional level of like actually putting in the effort that was needed. And as a kid, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
really have much control over my life, so it was
Yeah.
a little bit
Well,
there. But as an adult, it's like I can still call upon those memories, especially when watching videos like this. I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with this process,
mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
and
then it's like,
I think it's kind of daunting to think I got to do all of this at once. Like all these things I do, I need to change it up. And so I guess that's kind of why I think certain forms of baby steps are probably best anyways.
and plus I'm already like accidentally vegan on some days, just
Mhm.
out of the choices available to me,
Yeah.
and where it's like I've lived in more rural areas where it's either you make your own food or you go to the one diner.
Mhm.
And I've even gone as far as like I have friends that live off grid that have their own little like homesteading and out in the middle of nowhere sort of experiences, and like
Mhm.
they have rabbit colonies and chickens and goats and stuff, and they whenever I'm out there they're like, hey, you want rabbit stew tonight? And I'm like, yeah, that'd be awesome. And they're like, cool, let's go grab a rabbit and help me render down this animal real quick.
Oh,
Like
wow. Was that tough to do?
it was kind of easy, honestly.
Okay,
Like
because you were saying that if you had to do it yourself, you wouldn't do it, but as just an interesting thing to help out a friend, it wasn't that bad.
it wasn't that bad. Mostly it was like it felt more like a learning experience just because of the individual that I was hanging out with. just kind of
Mm.
turned it more into like this is how you would do this in a survival situation. But they're just one of those survival guru types. I would never go out of the way to raise my own rabbits or chickens or goats. That's where that laziness would come in. That's just so much extra work. And like their life revolves around the things it takes for them to live off the grid. And I'm like,
Hmm.
I want to write a book. I want to like go to the beach sometimes. I play a lot of card games. Like, I don't want to constantly be taking care of these things. And like,
Yeah.
there's so many additional, and like the butchering part, I'm like, it was cool that like I got the understanding and knowledge of like how they live their day to day. But I
Hmm.
was like, it's a lot of blood on my hands. And it's
Mm.
just, if I had to do that for every meal, there's no way. I
Right.
just,
Yeah.
it, it
Um.
was a lot of extra time. Like I'll wash some vegetables before I cook them, sure,
Mhm.
but additional meal prep beyond that is just it's more than I'm willing to put into it.
Especially if you don't have the time for it. I'm
Oh
going to
yeah,
respond to a couple comments real quick in here. Christina said, damn, 43 minutes into streaming and you're only 6 minutes into the documentary. So in this case, this is a strange case because even though I labeled it as reacting to Dominion, I actually had Chris here watch Dominion ahead of time and I watched it yesterday. And so part of our talking about it is based off memory. So when I do this in the future, I'm probably going to do things where I have people on to watch it in real time and not just having watched it before. Um, and then a reaction to Christian about the definition. Um, He's referring to rights violations. I do have a note that I add underneath my definition that talks about rights violations. But the reason that I think it's complicated is I think veganism's kind of on a spectrum as far as the actions because there's no way to fully be vegan. So vegans, we don't eat honey, even though I don't think that's a huge deal. I know vegans that are fully vegan, but they also eat honey. Most vegans will not eat honey because the bees make it for themselves. It's taking their food source away from them. Their lives get cut in half, and so on. But every vegan eats produce from the store, and anything that's not organic, and including some organic stuff, is sprayed with pesticides that kills bees and it kills all these other insects. And so a lot of us vegans will look at like the sentience levels and care more about a cow than a chicken, care more about a chicken than a rat, and care more about a rat than a ant. Um, but when you break this kind of stuff down, we're not all going to be perfect. And so, sure, if you go to a restaurant and you're wondering, like, what's vegan, you don't have to pinpoint if the vegetables are organic or not organic or whatever. But sure, it's probably best to label it as the dietary extreme form of what we think of as veganism. But as far as being a vegan, as far as us humans getting together and talking and trying to change the world, like, listen, if you haven't heard all this, go back and listen to Chris here, a person that's not vegan. His actions are probably about close to what your average non-vegan is, but his way of talking, and if every non-vegan that feels the same way as Chris here was part of us vegans all getting together and talking and sharing ideas with the world would become a way different place. There'd be so many more restrictions, and due to the amount of people talking about it, so many people that would like reduce their consumption and so on. So that's kind of why my definition doesn't focus on like how perfectly vegan one's actions are.
I think about the no true Scotsman fallacy when talking about stuff like that. I mean, I think it extends to a lot of different groups, but like anything that exists on a spectrum, I feel like can fall victim to. Well, you're not a true vegan. You can say you're vegan, or like the same with like religious groups, like oh, you're not Christian enough, or like you're not a true Christian, or all
Mm-hmm.
those various different in groups where it's like the people that are they say they're vegan, but they'll still like have something that would like honey in that sense, or the people that see anything living versus not just sentient ones.
Mm-hmm.
I think that then it's like that the no true Scotsman fallacy would rear its ugly head in those senses, which I mean I feel like could just cause dissent.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have a constructive criticism on it or anything. I think about that a lot whenever people reference themselves in one particular way or another.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting because you can't make anybody be something or not be something. Like somebody can claim they're vegan and they're not. Somebody can, so like the detail of what somebody does, like I feel like what changes the world. I mean, in large part is laws. Laws are kind of what matter. It's better to have something like gay marriage being legal than it is to have more people being not bigots. If 20% of the U.S. Right now are bigots that are anti-gay people, and we could remove gay marriage and make it illegal again, but make it to where 90% of people are accepting of gay people instead of 80. I would much rather have it be 80 and the law making like you have your rights than to need every individual to feel a certain way. And so I think laws are a huge thing, and the only thing that changes laws is conversations that lead to a want in a change, like in a change that makes politicians who want to get elected have to add that to their campaign, and then if they want to get reelected, they have to follow through with it. And so I think it matters so much more what somebody holds as their philosophy and what they strive for, even if it's just like 1 day a week they're vegan or 2 days a week, or if they try to eat more grass-fed than not grass-fed, or they're just spreading the message but they can't control their eating habits or whatever. That's such a more important part in my mind, but it's complicated. But Chris, I want to watch another minute here, and then I have a couple specific questions I have for you.
Yeah, of course.
So let's go.
Those who survive the first few days are mutilated without pain relief, their tails and teeth cut to reduce cannibalism, and pieces cut from their ears or tags punched in as a means of identification. They are taken from their mothers at 3 to 5 weeks of age. Most are destined for slaughter around 5 months later. As they age, they are moved into grower pens, crowded together in their own waste. Some female pigs are kept on to replace the sows in the breeding cycle, carefully selected for their perceived ability to produce large litters. Most
Okay, I'm going to pause it there. So the question I had for you, and I wanted to see a little more of this before asking, because we were talking about if it would be worth having these regulations. And so even though it's hard to, like, even with me and you, even you, a non-vegan, or at least a non-vegan in the traditional sense, like when we talk about the idea of regulations, it just seems so disgusting that the go-to is, no, it should be illegal to sell meat. And I definitely have the same idea. But as far as one thing being better than another, the challenge I kind of have for you would be, imagine, do you like Thai food?
Oh, I love Thai food.
Okay. Imagine there were two restaurants, and they were both Thai food restaurants. And since we're watching pigs, let's imagine it was pork. So you had like just a typical pad Thai, but it came with pork. Like if you knew one of the restaurants, all of their pork came from a farm, and somehow you just came across this information, but it came from a farm where they cut off the tails and the teeth, and they're crammed into small cages like this. And then you knew the other one, let's say you happen to know that it wasn't just free range, as far as how this documentary in a little bit shows that free range isn't great, but it's better. But let's say you knew that the pigs were running around on grassy areas and just having a great time. They didn't get their tails and their teeth cut out. And you found out this information. Would you stop going to the one if it was as simple as just instead of every other night you go to a different Thai place, now it's you only go to the one that has the no cutting off of tails and teeth?
Oh yeah, easily.
Okay.
I mean, I'd even be willing to pay a little extra if that was the difference.
Right. Yeah. And so I think most people would do something like that. And the problem is figuring out the details. Now, I think the problem is most companies want to make money, including independent, one-off, nice restaurants in Portland. And so there's a good chance that none of the restaurants will. Portland's different. There's a lot of full vegan restaurants, and there's a lot of. I'm sure they have some stuff where they say their stuff is grass-fed or whatever. But I guess the problem is finding that kind of thing out. And, even me, a vegan, I don't like to be that irritating person that asks too many questions at a restaurant. But so, yeah, it's just something that's kind of interesting, I think, is it'd be a bummer if you have like all these favorite restaurants and then you have to stop going to most of them and go to just the couple that use free range stuff. But just watching these videos and watching the tails and teeth cut out of pigs just for our own taste buds, I feel like even though I think just have the pad thai with tofu or the pad thai with veggies is the best route to go, I don't want to judge anybody's addictions, and I don't mean addiction in a bad way. I very much was addicted to meat, and I'm still addicted to vegan meats, which are unhealthy as well. So when I say addiction, I don't mean a bad thing, but it's the reason why I am so willing to say, like, it'd be nice to find some pork that you can eat from at least pigs that weren't tortured before they died. I wonder if there's a good way to do this. I wonder if I can call all the restaurants in Portland or in Salem or whatever and find like which ones are willing to tell me if they go out of their way to get better treated animals for their meat.
So I know that like last night I went to a restaurant that only had fish that they had caught like that morning, and
Mm.
that they are directly connected to a like couple of boats that specifically will go out fish whatever they bring back. That's what's on the menu,
Uh-huh.
and then they only serve until they have nothing left. They don't like freeze anything to like keep it for the for like later that day or something, or like they literally just make it and that's it. And it's always a long wait to try to get in there because everyone's trying to get in there, and it's just delicious food. You pay a few extra dollars more than anybody else in town, but like it's phenomenal food. And like every like even like the greens and everything, it's just all
Mm.
super fresh. You can taste it. It's
Awesome.
fantastic, and I liked it a lot. Like specifically, they do oysters as one of their big draws,
Mm-hmm.
and like just they explained like these oysters came from this bay, these oysters came from this bay. Like gave you a little bit of information on like where exactly your food's coming from. Like
Interesting.
they were very upfront with it, but it also was part of like the food experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like there is a lot of extra steps involved, and I just happened to be at the right place at the right time to get like to get into this restaurant. So they don't
Mm.
take reservations or anything. Like it's a little bit of like the Wild West vibe in that sense. But I'm
Gotcha.
also I'm also privileged enough to be able to afford to eat like that. So
Yeah.
I recognize that there's not just it's not like the most available experience for everybody to go and do.
Mm-hmm.
So it was fantastic, and it's definitely it's not the only place I've eaten in Portland where they're like give you the story of where everything comes from, and how they're trying to support either small local businesses or like specifically partnering with people that share their same values. And I think there is that level of like people wanting to move towards something better.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still like at least 5, 6 McDonald's between
Mm.
my house and where I work. And there's still like Fred Meyer with your nondescript located meats.
Yeah.
So it's like there are things that cost less and that are more convenient. But there also though I mean there wasn't a single seat empty in the restaurant I was in last night. Like
Oh,
are
gotcha.
people willing to go that extra step to pay that extra dollar to have something that has a less of an impact on the environment and isn't specifically tortured meat? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like I know that there are people out there willing to do that. And the way that Portland functions, it's like everybody knows that spot that does their best to do better. And some people that's their favorite spot. So it's not that it's not viable as a company and it's not an option for people to do. I feel like it's
Mm-hmm.
just changing those minds locally, but also I feel like that would be accelerated by the change in laws.
Yeah. Oh, definitely, definitely. And the changes in the laws won't come until we care. Like, I'm sure there are politicians that have things they care about and they try to push it, but I feel like most things it takes a certain portion of the citizens pushing it to make it become anything really. And so yeah, and I doubt there's going to be a humongous change in my lifetime as far as like the world going vegan or anything. But I listened to this video, this guy named Cliff Grant, who I actually don't get along with that well, but he's a vegan and he's a friendly enough guy. But he was talking to somebody, and they were saying, similar to you, like they care about animals, but they said so many people eat meat, like there wouldn't be much of a difference. Like why it wouldn't really matter if I stopped or didn't stop. And his reaction to them was really cool. It was pointing out like if 80% of people were racist, would you just be racist because they're being racist, or would you not do it because you think it's wrong to be racist? And so, because I think sometimes it can be daunting for people to think like, oh, I'm going out of my way to not consume this thing that tastes so good to me, but it's not even going to change the world. So why change it at all? And my thoughts are just like every little bit of reducing something makes that much less in demand, that many less are bred into existence. I mean, like farmers can breed way more than they currently breed. They just breed whatever's in demand, like the amount that's called for, and they wouldn't want to have like extra that they have to throw away. So every time somebody doesn't pass on a certain meal, they're adding to what's in demand, so more animals are bred. And every time they do pass, even if it's just a couple people out of a million or out of a billion, who cares? Every little bit of not eating meat when you could have ate meat just makes that however many less animals bred into existence. And it's just something that's kind of hard to grasp considering everything going on in the world.
I think that it's definitely interesting just because like I think about the whole like racism idea. Like if 80% of people were racist, would you be racist? I think it comes to like if your family was racist and you were raised in a racist family, you probably end up being racist.
Yeah, I think he just meant like if you had it in your mind, because this person was saying it's sad that people eat animals, and I think it's wrong, but I'm going to do it because everybody else is doing it. And so I think with the racist thing, it was the idea of if you think it's wrong to be racist, but you're just going to do it because everybody else is. Now, the reason that doesn't really work is because nobody gets a benefit from being racist. You're just if you're racist, you say the things you feel. Where with food, people can either be addicted to it or they can think that it's going to benefit their health in a certain way, and so that
I,
does become more complicated.
I think there is still that parallel too, where it's like, I mean, there are people that do get benefits from being racist, like depending on your community. and the people that you surround
Mm-hmm.
yourself with. But in the same sense, it's like there are people that will not want to go out to dinner with you because you're vegan,
Yeah, yeah, true.
and it's like, oh, you're not racist. We can't hang out with you anymore. Like the social situation around that. But also, it's like then if you just meet other people that are also not racist or are also vegan and join those communities and
Mm-hmm.
continue finding ways to best communicate for a better lifestyle with other people, you can see that change the same way that we saw the change with racism that then led to
Mm-hmm.
anti-discrimination laws.
Yeah, yeah,
So I
yeah,
feel like
exactly.
so many parallels there for sure.
Yeah. Well,
But
what about this? What if, since Portland probably does have a handful of places like the one you just described, where it's like the wild caught fish that day and whatnot? What if every time you go to a restaurant and you ask if their meat that you were thinking about getting is like grass fed or free range, if they say yes, then if you feel like it, get that one. But if they say no, then opt for the vegan option.
I mean, that's definitely doable, and it's a lot of times up here. It's just that stuff is either readily available or they're more than willing to talk about. Like there's when it comes to like sit down restaurant experiences, so
Mm-hmm.
many of these places are like, yeah, we'll have that whole conversation with you, and even with like the food carts, a lot of times they'll either be like explained on their menus or. So it's like
Yeah.
that's such an easy way to. That's where I'm like sometimes I'm accidentally vegan just because it's like, well, the vegan option just sounded really good. Like
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
just do a really good job of like catering towards uh, that mentality.
Mm-hmm.
I think though that's something too where it's I mean seeing that change at a smaller level would probably also help change like I'm trying to think of the cultural zeitgeist around meat consumption and where that really stems from
Mm.
and like politically where would you see that leaning like I mean, I definitely have a bias when it comes to political thoughts and like where I would assume the lines would be,
Mm-hmm.
just because I'm like, I assume most vegans would be the on the liberal, libertarian, or more demo in the quotations Democrat leaning, whatever Democrat actually means these days.
Yeah, yeah.
But like in that sense of more like blue on the more towards the liberal side of things, but like I mean, there's gay Republicans, so like
Yeah. Well, yeah, and like with me, like I'm very very much a centrist. I'm pretty pro life, but also anti circumcision, anti death penalty. Like my views are all over the place. But yeah, I think you're right. I think a good majority of right leaning people, or even some centrists, are the ones that use terms like soy boy and and
yeah.
have that Alex Jones mentality of you got to eat your meat
Oh, the
and
the meat only diet guys. I've
yeah.
not seen a single one of those be anything other than like staunch conservative Republican types. Like
Hmm.
I,
But
I'm not quite sure if that's all of them out there. Maybe there are like the hardcore, like I'm so vegan, I made my own shoes type to make sure
hmm
no animals were involved in the process, sort of thing. I maybe they exist out there.
hmm no,
I
there
don't
are
want
some of
to
those people.
Yeah,
Go
like I
ahead.
don't want to like completely believe that that's just a completely one-sided thing, but
Hmm.
I do know which groups tend to support factory farming and the laws and the lobbyists that focus around that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, though. I think a large amount of right leaning people and left leaning and centrist would be against factory farming and be willing to state it. Now, there will be some people that care about the details of taxation and how things are affected that way. But but I think when you look down at the morals of it, I really think most people would be on board for making farms not be able to cram so many. Like when you look at European laws, they have like you can only have so many chickens per acre, and or I think they call it a hectare over there, which
Yeah.
is 2.5, 2.4 acres. But anyways, they have all these laws because, well, whatever reasons they have the laws. Where here, it's just not something people talk about that much. So if we got people talking more, I think you would see the majority of people, unless they were to find out, like not find out, but unless it was to change something to make their taxes go up a whole bunch, I think most people would vote to say, yeah, let's do a little less torturing of these animals, even if we're going to eat them.
Yeah, like I think about like even people I disagree with the most would probably still agree with, yeah, she shouldn't be terrible to animals. Like,
Hmm.
but yeah, I think that I think it's that dollar amount is what would come to mind for me. Like, I feel like that's what would change the most minds. Like, if
Hmm.
you're like, we got to treat these animals nicer and we have to like impose these laws, and then someone else is like, if you do that, we're going to raise your taxes 20% to support that change. Then it's
Yeah.
like, that's where I feel like the opposition would come and play. But
That's why I think
I,
each individual should do what they can do. Like in your case, if you have a little extra money and you can choose that restaurant you're talking about, then you do that. And then people that can't, they're barely scraping by. They might not vote for a thing because it's going to change their taxes. That's reasonable, I think. Everybody just has to do what they're capable of doing. If there's some lady working two full-time jobs to take care of her five kids and she doesn't have a spouse around, and it's easiest for her to just grab fast food. Now, I'm not in favor of that. I don't think kids should be raised on unhealthy diets. I don't think people should be eating animals. But yeah, each individual, it's going to be tough, which is why I like to look at veganism as individual approaches of what can you do slightly better the next day.
I think that as long as we live within capitalism, we'd have to come up with like a money incentive for companies to want to
Mm.
move towards the veganism if that was like the goal to really move in that direction.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it like just making it cost more to not do vegan would be enough, where it's like if there was a fast food chain that was as, common as McDonald's, but was just completely vegan
Mm-hmm.
and didn't cost more than McDonald's, like literally even playing field, price points, you get the same amount of food either
Mm-hmm.
way, and was just as common. And I'm not quite sure if that would involve just like tax breaks for that particular company or like just making it more expensive to operate in the way that McDonald's operates.
Yeah, I don't
But
know
like,
exactly how subsidies work, but it'd be something like that.
yeah.
Like Impossible and Beyond Meat companies would if they got subsidies from the government and therefore could charge less. Yeah, that'd be
Mhm.
awesome.
Well, I think also it's like just saying like at the end of this of Dominion, it's like essentially the whole thing amounts to like we just need to not. And I rewatching Food Inc. It was like, well, we just need to support in quotations the vegan capitalists because
Mm,
they're the ones that can then buy the market space to do these things.
mm,
And I was trying to think of something that was because like if we just tell people to not and just show them the shock stuff, like that might change some ideas.
mm-hmm,
And I personally don't align with the idea of just give the billionaires that are making the thing you like the money instead of the other billionaires that are making the thing that you don't like. And I'm like,
mm-hmm.
I just don't see either of those as being like actual solutions. But
Yeah.
I think that developing an actual solution and then jumping into that space with like, here's the baby steps that would lead to where we want, and here's the big milestones of like understanding these are the big changes, and then like being able to equate that to something that had been good for humanity that was big changes, but also like farming changed the how many people we could have in a village. Like
Mm-hmm.
we wouldn't have these metropolises and everything without additional food being made for people that just don't make food. So it's like farming
Mm-hmm.
was a good thing that we then twisted and turned into something bad.
Yeah.
And that's sort of
Yeah.
the factory farming. Like we have to not only be able to be like, hey, these things were good and then this is where it went south, and like we have to also be able to see these are the things that we would want to show to be good, but we would also have to have the idea of like, if these things went well, what's the most extreme version that then could be twisted into a bad thing? Like having
Yeah.
answers as well as the future sight of knowing how it could go wrong and what to look for in those senses. So we wouldn't see the same change of the factory farms, but just being a different version and now just supporting veganism, but doing harm now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's definitely complicated. I don't know enough about capitalism to get too into it and share my thoughts. A few years back, I got to the point where I don't let myself pretend I know things I don't know. Um, but I've heard enough to know that like I think that there are good ways to do capitalism and bad ways. And I think laissez-faire is the term for like the old school capitalism where the government doesn't get involved and doesn't, the subsidies aren't going out, and so it's complicated. I don't know exactly what I think the right answers are, but there will always be companies when they are able to make money, they're going to try to do whatever they can. So having the laws in place, having the regulations, one that I think they have in Australia is, or maybe it's just in the UK, you have to, if you have a farm of animals, no matter what kind of farm it is, you have to have cameras, like CCTV cameras, I think it's called, or something like that. You have to have security footage that is on 24/7, kind of like police having their body cams. And therefore, the government can see what's happening in the factories to see if you're sticking to regulations.
I do like that. I mean, I feel like that's something too where it's like, at what level of government oversight do you want to have within like any other businesses? But I think that the larger the business might need more of that oversight, where it's
Mm,
like making sure they're not like growing in a way that's not great.
yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's right. Because yeah, if you have the cameras set up and then you have regulations saying only this many pigs per this amount of space and you can't cut the tails and the teeth out and all this stuff. And then you just the cameras are watched, and if they do it, they do it. The group went into a farm in Australia maybe a few weeks ago, and they broke in, they snuck in, put security cameras up, and caught like footage of what they were doing to these animals. And the company got shut down. They completely went out of business. The government shut them down, and now, obviously, the companies would be doing better if they were forced to have the cameras in there, and then they would stick to the regulations if they had to. But yeah,
I think that I think that there's so many complicated moving parts to anything in our day-to-day life that like without these kind of conversations, I wouldn't even think about the laws in which we would have to make that sort of stuff work. And that
right.
I'm grateful that there are people out there trying to make that difference though. That like
Hmm.
the idea to more heavily monitor these particular companies sounds great, but that part of my brain that's like I don't want government interference is like wants to
Hmm.
fight that.
Well, I think I'm the same way, but you only want government interference when there's an issue bad enough. Like so. The reason I'm mostly okay with all drugs being legal and people killing themselves off with meth if they want to is because they're having their liberty. They're having their ability to do what they want, even if it's harmful. And the same thing could go for why I think like prostitution should be legal. Like even if people are getting diseases and getting sexual diseases and whatnot for being prostitutes. Um, each person involved is willing, they're adults, they're doing their own choices, and They have this freedom. I think the reason why I don't mind people losing their freedom when it comes to like having a security camera in a factory farm is because we're now referring to something that we know scientifically can suffer, feel pain, be mistreated. So if we're going to have laws saying football players can't kick their cat into their wall, I think there's something to do with a football player kicking their cat, then we would have to have the laws saying something similar when it comes to like pigs and whatnot. And so even though it might seem off that the law lets people eat animals, but then lets them not be mistreated, I think that's just where your freedom starts to change. 'Cause the same thing with humans. Like I luckily I'm free to say whatever I want in the country I'm in, and I'm free to do most things I want to do. But like if I went to your house and punched you in the face, there's a law saying I can't do that because it's bringing harm to you. So extending that to animals, it feels like it's removing some freedom from like farmers, but they're choosing to have their profession involve something where somebody else is being harmed.
I watched a YouTube video the other day of a guy talking about morality, and he was reviewing a video on. It was just a thing. It was like a religious thing they were talking about, like the origin of morality, something along those lines. And he had said that his morality focuses on the idea of the reduction of pain and the increase of pleasure, but not one without the other. So he was like, just because something increases pleasure but causes more harm, that wouldn't be morally correct. And that it has to both reduce harm and increase pleasure for it to be considered moral in his opinion.
Gotcha.
And I was like, that's such an interesting, like there's that whole idea like, well, we're suffering all these animals, but that means pleasure for more people. But in his model, it would be, we can't be causing all this additional harm just because of some form of pleasure.
Yeah,
Like it would have to be.
it sounds like a counter
Sorry.
to yeah, that's fine. So utilitarianism, which is very similar to consequentialism, is that idea of like you maximize the most pleasure and reduce the most suffering, and so it's all a calculation of whatever's best for the most amount of people, and that's why when you have the trolley car problem, utilitarian would say that if the five were going to get hit, you would make it hit the one instead of the five.
Yeah.
And this sounds like a good counter to that, pointing out that just because you have enough pleasure here, like this sounds like the counter to utilitarianism, where somebody will say, like, if you have 10 men forcefully have their way with one lady, then if you calculate how much pleasure the 10 men get versus the suffering of the one lady, is it now okay because you cause pleasure? And I think that's a good point, that it shouldn't be like a mathematical problem where a certain amount of pleasure makes the suffering okay. I think we should just, anything that can suffer should have the negative rights to not be made to suffer.
Yeah, he equated it to the idea of like slavery wise, where it was like there was pain, but they were producing so much and they were doing it at rock bottom prices. So it was like the pleasure of the consumers of the products, the pleasure of the slave owners was great. And then there was all this suffering though because of it.
Yeah.
And it was like the number of cotton shirts made out of the cotton that those slaves picked far succeeded the amount of slaves there were. Like there was more shirts and more people having pleasure in wearing those shirts. But it was still at the price of all this pain and suffering. Like, and so he was like, that's why it's like you can't have, that was like his, like that's how you would easily define it being morally wrong for slavery. And it was like, then apply that to just everything in life, where it's like you're allowing this level of pain and suffering, but he's like, if you just do it so that there's the reduction of pain and the increase of pleasure, then there's like just having that as the moral compass, how the world would change.
Yeah. Well, especially if people got to choose, because I would say something like the value of having cars is probably better. Like it outweighs the amount of people that die in car wrecks. But that's not the only reason that we say, okay, let's keep having cars even though there's car wrecks. It's because individuals can choose. So an adult could say, I'm just not going to drive because I don't want to take that risk. And then they get to choose not to. But then somebody else can take that risk and they might die in a car wreck. But the amount of benefit that we get from what we can do by driving outweighs it. So I think it becomes complicated sometimes. But if a society does their absolute best to grant everybody their rights from like their negative rights to not be harmed, not be killed, whatever, that's probably the best approach to do. But yeah, I like that. You should send me a link to that video. I want to check it out.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find that one. I think that also too, where it's like, I think that less people would drive if there was just more options that were as convenient. Like
Yeah.
living within biking distance of your job, or if you have a long commute, being able to hop on a consistent train like the bullet trains in Japan sort of thing, or just like having the option to work from home if you do have a desk job sort of thing. Like we do have the technology. It's proven and globally that there's so many things out there that functionally make it so that you don't need to drive. And a lot of people then take those options over driving, decreasing the amount of car accidents and decreasing the amount of emissions from those cars. Like, I think that so much of America was there's so many videos on like how car companies helped change the way cities were made to then benefit them, to increase the sales of cars, to create this whole idea of car centric existence. And I was like, man, I didn't even think about that until I started like watching more videos on how things were developed to support cars. And like I feel like there's so much to unpack on just how much the meat industry has changed the American diet, the human diet, and that we like it's without those convenient and inexpensive alternatives, it's hard to see that change.
Yeah. Well, and it's wild to watch the change happen from like the 1970s when there's like 20% of the U.S. was overweight to now it's like 80%, and yeah, it's pretty wild. Hey, I gotta hop off here in a sec, but I want to try something. I was gonna do this on something separate, but I kind of want to do it while we're talking right now. Can you tell me the name of a restaurant in Portland that you really like, but that you don't know if it has free range stuff? So not the one that does the wild fish, but a different one.
Let's see. So I've been going to a lot of food carts lately, but the restaurant that I hit up about 2 days ago was called Nicola's.
Nicholas? Like
Nicola's, like Lebanese food. I didn't ask, and I was just in a hurry.
So Nick, like the name Nick, Nick, and then
yeah, think like Nikola Tesla.
Okay, Nick. Okay, but Leb.
It's Lebanese.
But that's part of the title. Well, how do you spell that name? The restaurant. I tried something up, but I don't think it worked. Portland. I'm gonna call them while we're chatting right now, and I'm gonna find out what they got. The only thing that came
Nicholas.
Oh, it is okay. Nichl.
Lebanese and Mediterranean cuisine.
Okay, Nichl. What now?
Nicholas.
Okay. Oh, and that's Nicholas. Just that's the only name, like and then Lebanese is like a subtitle almost.
Yeah, it's Lebanese and Mediterranean cuisine.
Oh, there we go. Found it. Okay. Opening it up. Let's see about menu.
They had some really good hummus there.
Awesome. I love me some hummus, and I would imagine they would have good hummus. I think I think Mediterranean. That's where hummus comes from. Okay, so Portland. Oh, it looks like they have a couple. There's Nicholas Madison, Nicholas Broadway, and then Nicholas and Gresham.
I was
Which
on the
one?
Broadway one.
You're on the Broadway. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna leave you here where you're at, and just don't say anything for a sec. I'm gonna put this on speaker. 503. Oh, I'm not gonna say this out loud. Not that it matters, but okay. We're gonna call. Put them on speaker.
This is Celine. How can I help you?
Hi there. I was just curious about some of your products. The meat in what you guys make. Do you happen to know if any of it is like grass-fed beef or like free range or organic or anything like that?
I believe none of them is. The only would be the lamb, since it's I believe it's a New Zealand lamb. So that would be the only one.
So the lamb, can you tell me exactly what it's listed as? It's like the lamb is free range or it's grass-fed?
Grass-fed, yes.
Okay.
That would be the only one that I know for sure. But the beef and the chicken, they're not.
They're not. Okay. All right. Sounds
All right.
good. Thank you so much.
No problem. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye. All right. Interesting. I want to try and do stuff like that where I check with companies. I want to make a list, actually. I like the idea of having a list of, like, even though I think it's best to be vegan, I think it'd be cool to have a list of if you're going to go to this place, here's the vegan options. But also, if you're going to eat meat, here's the better option.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's funny because I had the lamb and I didn't even think to ask
interesting.
her anything, but I was just like, whenever since lamb's not the most common option at most restaurants that I grew up around, I always, whenever I had a chance to, I'd be like, the lamb, please. But
Interesting.
like lamb and goat, it's like it like up here, it's a little bit easier because there's more diversity in the types of restaurants.
Uh-huh.
But like when I go anywhere else in like Oregon specifically, like a lot of other places, it's either beef or chicken,
Gotcha.
and
Yeah.
goat and lamb, and like there's a few places I had that had emu, and it was just like these additional meat options were just
Yeah.
not as prolific as the staples of America and being beef, chicken, or pork.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting. Well, one thing that's interesting about lamb, and I guess I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. A lot of people are bummed out at the idea of something being younger, like veal is a calf, and lamb is specifically under a year old. Once it's over a year old, I think it's referred to as mutton,
Mm.
and then under a year, it's lamb. I don't know if I care about the age. If an animal's dying, I don't know if I care. What are your thoughts?
I mean, my first reaction is I don't the age doesn't really change anything for me.
Hmm.
And it's like if it was mutton versus lamb, I would just pick whichever one was available. Or if it was both, I'd be like, well, what's the dish? Like there's
Hmm.
really comes down to if I'm consuming it, I want it to taste good. Like
Hmm.
it's more about the production of the plate versus the age of the meat involved. I think if I was more snobby about things, I'd have a better opinion. Like the
Gotcha.
whole
Yeah.
like, oh, the wagyu beef versus the like, I don't know, whatever the other like similarly like graded beef. I mean, like if it
Hmm.
tastes good, it tastes good. In my opinion, I'm not
Hmm.
like out here sniffing my wine before I drink it.
Gotcha. Yeah. 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 Wine people are funny. But yeah, no. So yeah, I'm kind of glad I called that place. I think it's interesting. Um, if yeah, and it's gonna come down to what you feel like you're up for. Like, I think one of the biggest problems is feeling overwhelmed, and so it's better to do something than nothing. And so yeah, if you're ever at that place and you can get a vegan dish, that's the best route to go. But if you feel like eating some meat and lamb seems similar to you to the veal, and we now know it's likely that their veal is not free range grass fed and their lamb is, then go that route. Yeah.
Well, I've noticed it was a little bit easier with like places like that serve Mediterranean. They seem to have a lot of like vegan options,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's just because that's like something that was a staple or is a staple in that cultural food. Where it's like I'm trying to think of American restaurants, and when I think of American restaurants, it's we're going to go have a steak or a burger,
Yeah.
or fried chicken being an additional like thing I think of when it comes to like American food. And I don't
Yeah.
nothing really comes to mind for being like the American vegan food that was like classic Americana, where I'm like I could have some falafel and not have
Yeah.
any meat. I mean, hummus is awesome, and like there's just
Yeah.
a lot of things within like Mediterranean food wise that just doesn't involve meat.
Mm-hmm.
And I just I don't really, nothing really comes to mind when it comes to like more American cultured food.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, there are good vegan replacements for American culture food. Like Impossible Burger is a great burger. It's kind of crazy how good it is. And a lot of pizza places are making vegan pizza. Although I'm not a fan of most vegan cheeses. They especially for pizzas. But yeah, there's a lot of options out there. You should try them out. I mean, like I know a lot of Thai places are doing mock meats, although I'd say tofu is probably a healthier route. That's the tricky thing too. If you like the idea of causing less suffering and pain to animals, and you're also wanting to look out for your health, then it's like a weird mix of trying to figure out like you don't want to get a vegan deep fried chicken replacement, but there are good healthy vegan options for sure. Especially it sounds like with that hummus dish with the Mediterranean stuff. I know a lot of people that do Mediterranean diet, and it's thought of as one of the healthier ones where everything is covered in olive oil. But yeah, yeah,
Have you ever heard of Brighton Bush?
it's like a resort getaway type thing.
Yeah, it's like 150-year-old hot springs.
Yeah, I think that's near where I live.
Yeah, it's
It's out
Detroit.
towards Detroit. Detroit. Yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and it's like a lot of things are geothermically heated rooms, and like um, they have a water wheel for electricity in the river, and
Mm.
they don't do any meat. Everything is either vegetarian or vegan.
Oh, awesome.
And I worked out there for 3 days while I was working on becoming a massage therapist, and
Oh,
part of
okay.
that was going out there, staying in the rooms, and like doing massage all day to get like more practical experience.
Mm-hmm.
And like the way they made their food and everything was phenomenal. Like every single day, 3 meals a day, and everything tastes amazing. And so it's like the idea. I've talked to a few people where they wouldn't do vegan stuff because they're like it doesn't taste good.
Mm-hmm.
And then like I had to agree for a little while where I'd tried some vegan stuff, but it was just like, oh, that just doesn't taste very good, or it would have tasted better if they had this in it. And that changed my opinion, honestly, just having that experience.
Awesome. Yeah,
And so it's
my
like,
sister's not vegan at all, and she's kind of anti-vegan. And she went with my wife, who is vegan, to the Tap House, I think it's called, in Salem. I don't know if you've been there, but they have like a lot of vegan options and non-vegan options. But I guess all their condiments are vegan. So like they have like a vegan ranch and a vegan like all these different things. And my sister said to the waitress the other day, she said, I see this as a vegan ranch. Do you have a non-vegan ranch? I don't like anything that's specifically vegan. And they're like, oh no, all of these things are vegan. And so she's like, I kind of want to go somewhere else. But she ended up staying. And she said that the ranch was better than any ranch she'd ever tried, and whatever the other thing was. And so it is kind of interesting that a lot of people think because something's labeled as vegan that it's missing something and they won't like it. And it's great that people are getting good at making vegan options for sure.
I was gonna say, do you think that's one of those like social programming sort of things where it's like the idea to create this idea that something's not good, therefore you shouldn't try it?
Yeah. No, I think people just have it in their head. Like there's just intuition that comes from various things. Do you remember when they made green ketchup?
I remember the green one and the purple one.
Yeah, purple too. Yeah, so like seeing the color throws you off because you're conditioned to think of ketchup as red. And so I think it's the same way where if you hear something's vegan, you know that means it's made different. It's like the alternate version. And so if you take something that's already vegan, like Oreos are vegan, but if you handed somebody an Oreo and said, here's the vegan version of Oreo, and had them try it, and then said, here's the non-vegan, and had them try that, I'm guessing your average person would go, oh yeah, the vegan one's gross, even if it was the same cookie. And it's just because they get it in their mind. So yeah.
Are you suggesting you do a game show type event where you have someone try, in quotations, the vegan versus non-vegan, but they're both vegan?
I'm thinking so.
I honestly, phenomenal. I would watch that.
I watched. I almost mentioned it earlier when you were talking about wine snobs. I watched a thing where they did this kind of study thing at this restaurant where they had people would come in that were like really into wine, and they would offer them a couple samples of different things, and each one was actually the same like low grade wine, but they called one this fancy name, and it was from this certain year, and they had them smell it and do this whole thing, and then they had them try this other one that was like a cheaper one, and they're like, oh yeah, the notes of something and the essence of something in this one. And these were professionals that do this, like that's part of what they do. And they were talking about how one was so much better than the other, and it was the exact same one. And
the movie Bottle Shock, same thing,
know.
where it was like the professionals were arguing if it was French or not. It ended up being like a wine from California. like this whole, like, yeah, I feel like there's so much of it is just the perceived, the cultural identity of certain things.
Mhm.
And I feel like veganism and vegan products falls within that sort of thing, because I think about like how veganism is portrayed in film
Mhm.
and in TV shows, or like oh, it's that annoying friend that had to bring a vegetable patty or whatever.
Yeah.
I feel
I
like
actually like it sometimes if the comedy is done right. In Scott Pilgrim, I love the
Oh,
were
yeah,
once a
yep.
vegan, but now you will be gone.
Yep. And I think about stuff like that where it's like I mean, I know that there is that shift with celebrities changing some of that view, but like, I mean, shows that would show things differently, changing that mentality.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's going to work for everybody, but it'll work for some people. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's changed. There's been a few TV shows that have changed my mind on a few things. So,
Gotcha. Yeah. Hey, I gotta hop off here though. I got another talk here in a few, and I gotta go pee and get more coffee. But it was a great talk, man. And if you want, you can send me names of every restaurant you like, and I'll find out what the most moral choice is for you to eat.
I like it.
Cool. All right, it's good talking, man. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Bye.